All right, Brian. Going into year two of the Mike Denbrock-led offense, and there's a lot of reason for excitement. We started to cover some of them and why we feel optimistic about what it looks like moving forward. There are some little hints in 2024 of what this could potentially look like. You compound that with the returning personnel pieces that you have coming back, more experience spread throughout across the offense. So there's a lot of reason for optimism with this group. But when you look at the 2025 offense, Brian, where do you kind of start? Where do you look at, and what are some of your main reasons for being optimistic about this group?
The biggest one, Trevor, is sort of a big picture view, and we'll get into more specifics of the players next. But this is related to um, related to players, but not specifically about individual players or positions, but just overall. I believe that the personnel we're going to see in 2025 is going to be better suited to what Mike Denbrock ultimately wants this offense to look like. I think there's some misconceptions about what a Mike Denbrock offense is ultimately going to look like, and there's this notion that he wants a running quarterback. I don't think that's true. I think Mike Denbrock has had running quarterbacks and he's made the most of it, but I don't believe that's necessarily the Mike Denbrock offense at Notre Dame. I think ultimately he wants guys that can drop back and throw the football, and yes, have guys that are also athletic. But if you look at the guys that Notre Dame has gone after in the last couple of years, the one thing since Denbrock has been here, it's guys that can throw the football. And he didn't recruit Deuce Knight. He didn't recruit him in the 25 class. When they lost Deuce, they went after Blake Hebert, who is an athletic guy, but you're recruiting Blake Hebert because he's got a big arm. They went after Noah Grubbs, right, and Brady Hart in the 26 class. Both of those guys have Brady's more so than Brady's the guy that can run, but he's not a runner. Both of those guys are drop back passers. And they ultimately went with Noah, who's the least athletic of the two. They didn't, I mean, they recruited Ryder Lyons, but he wasn't a guy that they necessarily viewed. He's the more athletic of that group. Yes, you'd like to have a guy that's mobile and athletic. Every coach wants that. But Mike Denbrock's priority, number one, in my opinion, is to have a guy that can drop back and sling the football all over the field. And then you let your running backs run the football. At LSU, he didn't have very good running backs. But he had a very dynamic quarterback. So he leaned into that. If he would have had a Jeremiah Love at LSU, I don't know that he would have asked Jaden Daniels to run as much as he did, because you're exposing your stud quarterback to a lot more hits. And then what you would have seen is Jaden Daniels still would have had a lot of yards on scrambles, but you wouldn't have seen as many of the designed runs that we saw from Jaden Daniels. And so I think that's the nature of it, of what he's looking at. And when I look at this Mike Denbrock offense, I think number one is you're going to see personnel better fitted. He wants a guy in the boundary that can be a dynamic one-on-one winner. Well, he's going to have that next year. He didn't have that in 2024. He wants a quarterback that's mobile, but one that can sit back and kind of pick teams apart in the pocket. He didn't have that in 2024. And he leaned into what made Riley so good. But they tried to do that early in the year, and that's partly why Riley struggled. And he eventually had to adapt to it. He wants to be able to have running backs that can be big play guys. He already had that. He wants running backs that can be physical as well, and he had that. So I think running back is kind of in a good place. Offensive line, if you're going to have a quarterback can throw the football, you need an offensive line that can protect the quarterback. My expectation is that the offense will be better at that next season. I'm not as sold on that one as others, because I still don't know what Joe Rudolph is going to do from a personnel standpoint. But if he does what I hope that they do, which is move Anthony Knapp inside, let him battle at either center or guard, have Jagasol be your left tackle. I mean, we saw in the playoff game that they were better at left tackle from a pass pro standpoint. And I think Anthony Knapp becomes a liability in the pass game to he'll be stronger in the pass game as a guard. It's just a completely different type of, you got to retreat a little bit, but it's a different type of pass blocking. You get Ashton Craig back. You're going to be more athletic on the offensive line is really what I'm getting at. Now it's up to Joe Rudolph to teach it better. But it's hard to teach pass pro when you're putting out 5, 6, 7 different offensive line combinations as well. And so those things are, Billy Strauss starts here at right guard, ends here at left guard after missing 4 or 5 games in between. So there just was a lot of things that kept it going. That's my one question mark. But overall, when I look at the makeup of this offensive line, I think that's better suited to carry out his desire to be a physical running team that can drop back and throw the football effectively. And so I just think overall the personnel's better suited. You've got playmakers at receiver, after the catch guys at receiver that he likes. They've added some speed to the receiving core this offseason with Will Pauling and Malachi Fields. You saw Jaden Greathouse broke out. Him and Jordan Faison are both going to be far more experienced as just young people, but also within the offense next season. We saw late in the year what it looks like when Faison's really a part of what they're trying to do. You saw that against Georgia, saw that against Indiana, and obviously against Penn State and Ohio State. We saw what Jaden Greathouse can do. So I think now Mike Denbrock goes into the season feeling a lot more comfortable with what I have, looking at it from his standpoint. What do I have at receiver? Do I have playmakers at receiver? Do I have guys that can do things after the catch? Do I have guys that can win one-on-one battles? Do I have speed to get down the field? And there's more of that this year, especially if KK Smith and Cam Williams can get healthy and break out too, because like Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse are not burners. Will Pauling has really good speed as far as like testing speed, but we haven't seen him utilize that in college the way that you hopefully he'll be able to use it at Notre Dame. The two guys we know that can flat out stretch the field are KK Smith and Cam Williams. Well, KK got hurt in the middle of the year. You hope that he can be back and battle. And then obviously Cam needs to have a breakout year. But also that's why having Malachi Fields is important, because he can be a vertical player. So I just think overall the makeup of this football team is far better geared towards what Mike Denbrock likes to do schematically and philosophically than it was in 2024. And that's where you just a lot of my excitement has been when you and I have talked about that. Yes, we talk about the quarterback, but it's not so much that the quarterbacks are talented, because Riley Leonard was very talented. It's their talent is more suited to what I think Mike Denbrock likes to do. Right. So I'm not sitting here talking about, Trev, oh man, I can't wait to see what this offense does when they have a real quarterback. I'm not saying that at all. You're not in the national championship game without Riley Leonard.
Correct.
It's just, you're not. You take any of those three tackle quarterbacks and put them in the lineup this year, Notre Dame's probably not a playoff team, much less playing for the title, because that's what this team needed. I think next year's team is going to be different. And so when I look at next year's team, it's more about you're going to have talent at quarterback again, but that talent is going to be better suited for what I think Mike Denbrock wants to do. But what Mike Denbrock wants to do has to be built around having the talent to do so. And that's why the quarterback matters. That's why the receiver talent matters. And it's why getting better production from the offensive line is far, far more important.
You know, when you look at it big picture, high level, we've seen even at Notre Dame the kind of identity that Mike Denbrock wants to have as the leader of the offense, right? I mean, I think 2015 was a pretty decent example of what his idea is of some of the personnel groupings with his offensive philosophy, right? I mean, you had a kid in Deshaun Kaiser who, like, he was mobile, like he could run, right? But he was known for his arm strength, right? He had a beautiful deep ball. You know, Malik started the season at starting quarterback. I think he was a little bit more mobile than what Kaiser was, but Malik could also let that thing fly. I mean, that deep ball to Will Fuller in the first game against Texas was, I mean, then follow that up with the deep shot against Virginia. That went like 60 some odd yards in the air.
My dad was at that game, and he was in the end zone because he's from Virginia, and his brother-in-law is a UVA fan. My Uncle Bruce is a UVA fan, so they went to that game together. And my dad was at that game, and that pass came to them. He goes, I thought he was going to way underthrow him. He waited so long, and my dad knew how fast Will Fuller was and all that. He's like, man, oh, he's going to overthrow him. And then about 2/3 of the way there, my dad's like, I think he overthrew him. Like, he couldn't believe how far Malik threw that football.
It's crazy.
I mean, it was wild. I think Malik Zaire might have been the only quarterback in the country that year that could overthrow Will Fuller.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was wild. It was wild. Yeah. But like, to your point though, he used that season against Texas, against Virginia, and we even saw it like when Deshaun came in. You know, USC, what'd they do first play of the game against USC? Bomb Will Fuller, right? Stanford, how many bombs did he throw to Will Fuller against Stanford? Temple.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then, but to your point, it does go beyond just the quarterback, right? CJ Procise wasn't 1,000-yard back that year. I think he had like just a hair over is like 1,030 something.
Yeah, he
I
was
think that year.
1,000, but he also missed like 3 games
Yeah,
that year too. So, he would have been over 1,000, no problem. I mean, he'd probably been 1,200 yards if he didn't get hurt. But then he
probably.
gets hurt. Josh Adams comes in, and Josh Adams sets a freshman rushing record with over 700 yards. Almost, he had like the 100 yards against UMass. He had like 30 yards against Texas, a 26-yard run against USC. The vast majority of his yardage came after CJ went down, and he stepped into the lineup.
But it just goes to show that that was one of the last offense. There's been some at Notre Dame since 2015 that had the ability to continue, like to consistently push the ball down the field. But 2015 was one of the last ones that I can confidently say, like week in, week out, you knew that there was going to be multiple downfield shots
Against good teams.
Yes.
Last year's pass offense threw the ball downfield a lot against Central Michigan,
Tennessee
against
State.
Tennessee State, against Pitt,
Right.
against teams that stink.
Right.
We didn't see them have success with that against Ohio State. We didn't see them have that success against Duke. They threw a couple deep balls against Louisville. You had one of them got dropped. One of them got called back because of illegal hands to the face. You couldn't effectively do it. They didn't, they had the deep ball against USC late in the game, but they didn't try to push the ball down the field until then. They didn't do that against Clemson. They were very aggressive throwing the ball against teams that they knew they had way better players than.
Yep.
That offense in 2015 was like, we're throwing the ball deep.
Yep.
Period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Compound that with a good running game, you kind of get the sense of, what Mike Denbrock wants to do schematically, which kind of falls into what we talked about in the first part of the show, is why they weren't able to do that because some of the pieces didn't align.
Right.
But when you go through and you start breaking down what the outlook of this offense could look like in 2025, one of the things is there will be changes to the pass game, right? Because no matter who it is, whether it's Steve, Kenny, CJ, they just have a different arsenal than what Riley Leonard did.
Yeah, like you're talking about the deep ball just a second ago, Trevor, and just so we're understanding, we're not saying Mike Demers can come back and throw 15 go routes a game.
Right.
He didn't throw a ton of go routes at LSU. He liked having it in his arsenal where he could throw 3 or 4 targeted, 5 maybe targeted shots a game. Like they're playing Alabama in 23, and I think they're down 14-0, and he runs a play action pass, and he has Malik Neighbors run a post route over the top for a touchdown. I mean, he's going to try to find those pieces. It's not just dropping back and running all verts every other play.
Right.
But it's like, hey, we're going to be aggressive throwing the football. Sometimes aggressiveness means we're hitting the intermediate stuff. We're going tempo. Sometimes aggressiveness means, hey, we got a one-on-one outside. Let's take it. Mm-hmm. We saw that in the last 2 games of the year when he felt like Riley was feeling the slot fade. There were stretches this season where we hardly ever saw the slot fade get thrown. Hardly ever. And then there'd be times when they'd run it in the red zone. What we saw in the postseason was in the last 2 games was they're going to that route a lot more. You had the 3rd and 9 conversion by Jaden Greathouse. You had the touchdown in that game to Jaden Greathouse. You had the touchdown to Jaden Greathouse on that same route against Ohio State. That route was wide open earlier in the game, and he didn't throw. Riley didn't throw it, but like as Riley got more comfortable throwing the ball down the field, you started to see him go to it, and he still didn't do it as much as you're going to see him do because it was just kind of like that one route. It wasn't the other stuff that Mike Denbrock likes to do. This offense, I think, Trev, will be more geared towards allowing him to do that because just starting at the quarterback position. My knock on Steve Angeli, and I wrote about this the other day, is Steve is I'm going to throw it short, I'm going to throw it deep. That's it. I mean, in the games he's played, so you look at the Oregon State game and you look at the Penn State game, the number, I think he's 0 for 3. I think in the 10 to 19 range, I think is what I had him down like 0 for 3. I mean, he hardly ever throws that because he's got that long release and he's not a quick processor. So I'm throwing deep because my read is one-on-one. I get back, I throw deep, or I'm throwing checkdowns in short game. That's what his game has been. But he can throw a great deep ball. I mean, you saw that against Oregon State. He hit 2 deep balls against Oregon State. One of them was the guy was wide open, but the other one to Jordan Faison, he dropped it over top of a DB. One of the best balls we saw a Notre Dame quarterback throw all year was that slot fade to Jaden Harrison against Purdue that Steve threw over the top. You remember that one? Now it's a gorgeous ball. We saw him do that last year against, was it Wake Forest, where he threw a slot fade to Jordan Faison. It was underthrown, but and then we know that Kenny can throw the deep ball. We saw him do it in the spring game, and we saw CJ throw a beautiful go inside move. So he threw the ball inside of the corner over top of the safety for a touchdown to Micah Gilbert. So we know that these quarterbacks have really good deep ball ability. That was never Riley's strength. He was better at it at Duke than he was at Notre Dame. But even at Duke, he could throw a good deep ball, but he wasn't consistent throwing the deep ball. These three quarterbacks have much better deep ball ability and willingness to throw the deep ball than maybe what we saw. Now, will they be that way as starters? That's what we don't know, because it's a lot easier to do that when there's no pressure on you, Trev. But the reality is the arm talent to throw the deep ball is much greater there than it was before. Like here's a perfect example statistically. We talked about how short game driven this offense was, and Steve Angeli's start against Oregon State and against Penn State, his percentage of throwing the ball less than 10 yards down the field is higher than Riley Leonard's was. So he threw even more short balls than Riley did on average, because he was either because you're like, well, I remember this deep ball, because it was either deep ball or check down. And that's an issue Steve's gonna have to work through. But if Steve's the starting quarterback, the deep ball shots are going to be there, because he's proven he can hit that ball. We know that Kenny and CJ can hit that ball as well. So I think that's number one, saying something where, yes, the quarterbacks can throw it, but with Malachi Fields, with Jaden Greathouse and his emergence, hopefully KK or Cam Williams can step up as well and provide you some more of that. I think Eli Raridan can be a legitimate vertical weapon as well, because I think he's a little bit more explosive vertically than what Mitchell Evans was. Mitchell was more athletic and smooth. I don't know that Mitchell was a guy that you're going to say, hey, let's run a slot fade from midfield to Mitchell Evans, where you may do that with Eli Raridan. If you get cover one and he's matched up against a safety or a linebacker, you may say, hey, let's take this shot to him. Mitchell's a different type of player. So I think that's where I look at it and say, number one, you're going to have a more aggressive vertical offense because the quarterback's number one, but also you have a different group of skill players now than you did last September. Even when you look at like Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse, there's more confidence in them being vertical players with the slot fade type stuff than what you saw early. And then you had Malachi Fields to the mix. Hopefully they can get more out of Will Pauling in that regard. But those are aspects of it that you look at, Trev, and say, okay, that's where some of my optimism comes from, that this pass offense is going to be more aggressive getting that ball down the field this past season, assuming the pass pro gets better.
You said something that I want to touch on that I couldn't agree with more, and it's the intermediate passing game. Like, yes, we talk about being more of a threat downfield, which is true. This past season, Notre Dame, any opponent that they faced on defense, they knew coming in, it's like, all right, this if we get beat because they throw and complete 8 passes of 30 yards or longer in the air on us, then maybe it's just Notre Dame's day. But it was never really a threat. But the intermediate passing game is something I wanted to touch on. I've been diving through and I've been looking at just where Notre Dame stands as far as pass rankings go, and not just this past season, right? I mean, the last 3,000-yard passer that they had was Jack Cohn in 2021, and it took a 509-yard performance in a bowl game to get him to 3,100. Now, with that being said, I still look at it with a little bit of an asterisk, because he was like in and out of the lineup because they were, putting in Buckner and then putting Cohn back in. So I do think he would have naturally gotten there without that type of bowl performance if he was just the quarterback for 12 consistent games, right?
Right.
But I went back through and I started looking at some different pass offenses in the past, right? And like the passing leaders from 2024 to 2020 or to 2019. And, Notre Dame, they ranked 39th, 50th, 89th, 28th in like passing yards in a season. Right. But the thing that I wanted to highlight was all of the passing leaders outside of Mac Jones and Joe Burrow in 19 and 20 in back-to-back years, their yards per attempt average was under 9. And the intermediate passing game is something that we haven't seen consistently from Notre Dame. Like the ability to your point with Steve, a lot of it was it's either check down or bubble screen, or they throw a fade or take a one-on-one shot outside. The intermediate passing game is something that Notre Dame hasn't had in a while. You go back through, Kyle McCord had 4,700 passing yards this year. He averaged 8.1 yards per attempt. You look at last year, Michael Penix had 97 yards short of a 5,000-yard passing season. He averaged 8.8 yards per attempt. Bo Nix, Carson Beck, Jaden Daniels, all those guys had more of a yards per attempt, higher average than what Michael Penix did. And it's that way all the way until you get back to Mac Jones in 2020 when he, I believe, was at like 10. So the intermediate passing game is something that makes me really excited about this upcoming season because now they do have the personnel groupings to make that more of a threat in this offense. Because I think sometimes when people hear downfield threat, they assume that means like 4 verts. You know what I mean? And it's just things that like routes that have the ability to be ran and completed past the sticks, right? Like that's the way that I look at a downfield, like intermediate passing threat.
Well, it's like, yeah, okay, we see the slot fades and all that, the post routes and go routes, but like the routes that we're missing too much from Notre Dame this season and in past seasons, it's not even that type of stuff. It's that deep over route, that backside dig that we saw CJ bang multiple times in the spring, where it's you're coming to that backside dig route. We didn't see Riley throw that a lot, and when he did, he wasn't great at it. I mean, we saw him miss on the first drive of the game. Chris Mitchell's coming backs out on about a 15-yard dig, and he's open. You hit that sucker, and he cuts it up for a 20-yard gain. Your passing numbers are going to look a lot different if you start making those type of throws. And so, those are things that you look at and you say that they've got to get better in those areas where you have to be like when Marcus Freeman makes this statement that the offense has to be willing to attack teams, for width and depth. It doesn't just mean we're going to run screens and post routes and go routes. It's I've got to be able to attack you on every level of the defense. And that's something that we didn't see enough of from Notre Dame this season. And honestly, we haven't seen enough of from Notre Dame in the past either for different reasons. What's interesting is, like Ian Book was a really good deep ball thrower when he would actually throw it. The problem is he was very gun shy when it came to throwing the deep ball. Jack Cohn was more willing to do it. It's just he didn't always have the receivers in the pass pro to do it. But like you look at like the Florida State game, Jack Cohn threw some gorgeous deep balls in that game. The Oklahoma State game, because like to your point about Jack Cohn's stats that year, let's not forget in his last 3 starts at Notre Dame, he threw for 285, 345, and 509. But then he went through that stretch from Wisconsin where he got knocked out of that game. He got yanked against Cincinnati. He got yanked against Virginia Tech. He threw for 158, 114, and 108 in those games. Yeah, those are more normal games, and he's easily over 3,000 without throwing 68 passes and 509 yards in the bowl game. And that's kind of the point, Trevor. But there was periods of time that season where you were not afraid of Notre Dame's pass game. And I'm not saying Notre Dame's going to come out and it's going to look like a Mike Leach-led offense next year, but it's about creating more of a viable offense. And for me, I don't know if that's 3,000 yards, 3,200 yards, 3,500 yards, 30. That doesn't concern me as much. It's I want the efficiency and explosiveness to be better. So if you're going to throw the ball 23 times a game, you better be averaging around 9 yards per attempt. And this needs to be true against everybody, not just the teams that stink. So like Sam Hartman had one of the best yards per attempt seasons that Notre Dame's ever had from a non-option quarterback. But it was always against the teams that weren't any good. And that's not just Sam Hartman's fault. The entire offense had that problem. But like you look at Sam Hartman's numbers last year, and Sam had the best passer rating for Notre Dame quarterback since Jimmy Clausen in 2009. At 159, he averaged 8.9 yards per attempt. Ian Book was at 8. Jack Cohn was at 8.2. Ian Book was at 8.0, 7.6, and 8.4. Brandon Wimbush was 6.8. Deshaun Kaiser was in the low 8s. They haven't had that. Riley was at 7.1 this year, and Sam at 8.9. That's because against the completion percentage was not even that great. It was only 63.5%. They were much more willing to throw the ball down the field, but it was always against teams that weren't good. 10.9 against Navy, 11.4 against Tennessee State, 11.9 against NC State, 12.7 against Central Michigan, 11.5 against Pitt, 10.0 against Stanford, 9.6 against Wake Forest. But then it was 7.0 against Ohio State, 7.4 against Duke, 6.7 against Louisville, 6.3 against USC, 4.9 against Clemson. Right? Like that's where the offense is going to have to get better. Is you've got to be a threat because Ohio State and Texas, they're not going to look, oh, man, these guys torch Tennessee State and Central Michigan. Ooh, we're shaking in our boots. They're going to be like, well, you didn't throw against anybody good. Let's see if you can do that against us. And there's been years they've had the receiving core to do that, but not the quarterback. There's been years that they've had the quarterback to do that, but not the receiving core. One of my reasons for optimism is I think next year you're going to have more guys going to attack all three levels. And not a guy that can attack all three levels, but different. Like Jaden Greathouse is not going to be a guy you're going to throw 30 deep balls to next year on like go routes and post routes. His deep balls are going to be the slot fade. They're going to be that climb route over the top, like we saw him catch against Ohio State. It was that over route on 3rd and 9. Like that's what's been missing from the offense. It's that type of stuff, banging those backside digs when you're bringing your read back to the backside. All those things have been missing from this offense for a while. And my hope is that with the quarterbacks they've recruited and the receiving core that they're going to have on the offense next year, and knowing what Mike Denbrock likes to do offensively, that we're going to see more of that. Because to your point, Trevor, I mean, Mike Denbrock had a brilliant receiving core at LSU in 2023. They weren't a team that threw 100 deep balls. They were just really good at throwing the deep ball because he would be smart about when he went to it. And that's something that he's going to see here. But it's that intermediate stuff that you really make your living on. Hey, we're dangerous because we can hit those intermediate routes. We can hit the deep overs, the backside digs, and that starts getting safeties coming up and up and up more. And now that's when that post route, and if you've hit like 3 dig routes coming backside dig routes, all of a sudden that free safety is thinking like, I got to play that route. He's not thinking as much about that one-on-one to the outside, and that's when LSU would go at it. So like Jaden Daniels in 2023 only had 54 deep ball attempts. 55 deep ball attempts. That's it. Only 55. That's not a ton for a guy that played 12 games, right? It's barely over 4 a game. But he hit 63.6% of them, and they went for 22 touchdowns. Now, I'm not expecting Notre Dame's offense to do that because they don't have Jaden Daniels or Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas. The point, however, is you expect it to be a lot better than it was this year, and just from a usage standpoint and an effectiveness standpoint, and that's the bigger question. So, like Riley this year threw 43 deep balls in 16 games. I mean, that's less than 3 a game. They threw 75 intermediate routes this year in 16 games. Jaden Daniels threw 71. So if you look at LSU, 38% of their throws were 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. There's only 29% this year at Notre Dame. That number needs to be somewhere closer in between those two numbers next season. 35-ish%, where you're hitting those routes and you're hitting them with a higher percentage of completion success because, you know, again, I don't expect them to be this good, but Jaden Daniels is at 63.6 completion deep ball, 63.4 intermediate. Notre Dame this past year, Riley Leonard was 46.5 on deep balls and only 52 on intermediate. You've got to be closer to 60 on intermediate and closer to 50% on deep balls. That's where you need to be. Around 50% on deep balls. If you're around 50% on deep balls, you're in a good place. Riley was actually at 46.5, which isn't terrible. You get around 50 to 53%, you're a pretty good deep ball throwing team. And the 52% on the medium, 10 to 19, that's got to get a lot better. That's got to be around 60 or higher. So those things have all got to be used more consistently, and also they've got to be used more effectively. And that's something that I do expect to see more of this season from the Notre Dame offense. And that's where you become a more dangerous passing team. And if Notre Dame can get to around 50% plus on deep balls, if they can get to around 60% on intermediate throws, that's how you force teams to back off of out of the box and say, if you're not going to defend, if you're going to try to overtake the run, we're going to crush you with our throwing game. And that's something where teams this year were basically daring Notre Dame to throw the football against them. And they obviously weren't able to effectively counter that. And they're going to have to do a much better job of that next season. And I expect that to happen because that's what Mike Denbrock does. I mean, that's what he's good at. That's what his offenses have been pretty good at over the years. Trev, let's go back to 2015. Again, no Will Fuller. 40.9% of Deshaun Kaiser's throws were 10 or more yards down the pass line scrimmage. He completed about 57.1% of the medium and 41.5. Now, that's got to be better from a completion percentage standpoint, but you saw an offense that was far more willing to attack down the field in 2014 and 2015. In 2014, with Everett Golson, they were 39.7 throwing the ball down the field. And so you look at it, and you're like, those are pretty good rates. So they were at 24.5 and 13.6 yards per attempt on those routes at LSU in 2023. Notre Dame's got to, they've got to get closer to that than what they were this past season, where when you look at Riley Leonard, he was at 15.3 on deep balls, 7.8 on intermediate throws. Compare that to where Everett was in 2014. Everett was at 14.2 on deep balls and 10.1 on intermediate. Even if you, and that's under Mike Denbrock, even if you just get back to those numbers, that's a big jump in production for the offense. And those are things that you look at and say, hey, those things have got to get better. They were at 15.4 and 9.7 under with Kaiser in the next year. If you add in Malik's numbers for his first two games, obviously, Malik averaged 38.8 on deep balls and 10.3 on intermediate. So that offense as a whole went down the field. Why did Mike Denbrock why did he do that at LSU? And why did he do that at Notre Dame in 14 and 15? We didn't do that at Notre Dame 2024. They had personnel for it. So he's smart enough to say, that's not who we are. I just think next year, you're going to see more of that next year. And I also think, this is what I think. This is what I hope. I hope that next year we also see the running backs used more in the pass game as well. Screen game, but then also just the traditional passing game.
Sticking with the common theme here with the running backs and just the run game overall, there's going to be some run game alterations that Notre Dame is going to have to make, right? Because the one thing that Notre Dame's offense is losing from 2024 is the running ability of Riley Leonard at the quarterback position. He had over 900 yards, I think 907 rushing yards this past year and 17 rushing touchdowns. So it's a big facet of the offense that you're losing, right? So what are some of the things that you're expecting to see in the changes to the run game for Notre Dame this season?
Well, I'm just going to give you the number because it's actually a really impressive statistic from Riley Leonard. But Riley Leonard this year rushed for 982 yards and 5.7 yards per attempt and 17 touchdowns in non-sack situations, according to Pro Football Focus. That's a lot. Your Steve Angeli can run and scramble. He showed that in the Purdue game, right? I mean, they ran a read zone for him. He pulled it and broke a tackle and ran for 20 yards. Again, that was against Purdue's defense, who stinks. But they're going to play teams like that. Obviously, we know Kenny can run. We've seen him do that. We saw him do that against Purdue. We saw him do that in the spring. He can scramble, do some design runs. CJ is not a guy you're going to be doing a lot of designed runs on, although he can pull a read zone backside. But CJ is also a really athletic kid that can scramble. I mean, he had a really impressive 75-yard touchdown run as a junior that you could kind of see his wheels. They're all three quality athletes. Steve's probably third from an athleticism standpoint, but Steve is a willing runner, and we've seen that during his career. But you're going to see more of the scramble game impact the run game with the quarterbacks and less of the designed runs. And so two things. Number one, you're going to see more of the touches go to the running backs. Now, it's not going to say Riley had this number of touches, and now those are going to be evenly distributed to the running backs because some of those are going to turn into throws. But that's a lot of carries that need to get split between your top two running backs plus Aeneas. And I think that we're going to have a chance to see Keidron Young maybe take over that role of short yardage goal line back that, I mean, Jeremiah can do it as well, but Keidron can take on some of that burden as well as a short yardage runner. And so I think your run game is going to have to be adjusted, how you get to certain things, because you're not going to protect it the same way you protected it with Riley. You're going to have to protect it a little bit more formationally at times in 2025. You're going to have to do things more where your RPO game, I think, needs to take a step up this season. What's interesting is there's a lot of people say, well, you can't run a lot of the read zone stuff next year. And I'm like, they didn't actually run a lot of read zone stuff after the first 4 games. They'd run it at times, but Riley wasn't good at it because Riley wanted to keep it all the time. And there's a lot of times where he would keep it, and you're like, dude, if you'd hand that sucker off, Jeremiah Love is gone or Jadarian Price is gone. But that's just kind of was Riley's mentality, and that's not a criticism. That's just He wanted, I need to make this play. I think he never quite got completely out of his mind that you're not at Duke anymore. He did to a degree, but in certain situations like read zones, short yardage, he still had that, I need to make this play for my team, which is, if you're going to have a criticism of a player, that's a heck of a criticism to have. Like you tried too hard to make plays for your team. It wasn't about selfishness. It's just about, I need to go do this for my team. And he just wasn't great at making those read zone decisions. I think CJ and Kenny and Steve will probably be better at Riley than that, when they could just pull the ball on a third down and your second down and first down and just run and scramble and slide after gaining 8 yards. You know what I mean? Those type of things. But we're not going to see as much of that from this offense, but we are, I think, going to see more RPOs to protect the offense. And schematically, we're going to see some things where hopefully we see more, some of the pin and pull type of stuff wrinkled in, not as a primary, but wrinkled in. They did it too much in 2023. They didn't do it enough in 2024. And I think part of that was just the offensive line. Mike Denbrock's like, we don't have guards that are great pin and pull guys, and we don't have a center that's really a pin and pull guy. So those are all aspects of when you look at it and say, it's going to look a lot different. How the ball's distributed, what they do in short yardage, how they protect the edges with the current quarterback situation. How is the pass game going to better protect the run game? I think that's going to be huge. It's not a coincidence that when they put Steve in the game, they ran that RPO where the defense came down and Steve pulled and threw that little pop pass to Cooper Flanagan. They called that earlier in the game, and Riley he didn't read it correctly. These quarterbacks think they're going to read that stuff a little bit better. And so I think there's going to be a lot of different ways that you're going to be able to look at this offense and say, the run game is still geared on inside zone. We're still going to see duo. We're going to still see counter. But how they're going to be utilized and how they're going to be protected is going to be a lot different. And we're going to, I think, see more designed touches from this offense with the running game and pass game to the running backs than we saw this year, where so much of the run game was built around Riley because it needed to be. I think it's going to be more running back focused next season, significantly so.
It kind of talks about why success in the pass game is so important, because you're not going to have that threat of Riley with his legs. I do also think from a personnel standpoint, your offensive line is getting more athletic than what it was this past season. So you could see pin and pull more involved there. I think you have more. I'm big with tight end blocking, if I'm being 100% honest. And I think you were getting more willing blockers at tight end this year in the rotation, if I'm being honest. So, thing like edge being sealed, I think is going to be significantly more effective this season. But I think it's all going to be factors into Notre Dame having run game success this year.
Let's be real here, Trevor. I'll say it. Mitchell Evans was a really good football player for Notre Dame in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually a good blocker in his career. He was not a good blocker in his last 2 years. There were games here and there where he would block really well, but overall, he just was not a good blocker. And not someone that necessarily seemed to put as much emphasis on blocking as he does pass blocking. I mean, there's some times this year where he was just downright bad at pass blocking, and like he didn't seem like he wanted to. And you'd get so annoyed by it. It was hilarious watching Trevor. I'd bring up tight end pass blocking or run blocking, and Trevor would like just sit up like this, like he's getting all fired up. I'm talking when he and I are just talking, not on even on shows. I'm talking when he and I are just talking, and he'd get so mad about it. You're going to need to be better next year. You're going to need to your tight ends are such an important part of protecting the edge of your run game and being focal points. And Eli Raridan wasn't a great blocker this year either. Cooper Flanagan was a little inconsistent run blocking this year, but you saw with Cooper, you saw in the Indiana game when Cooper was technically sound in the run, like Cooper was always a willing blocker. He wasn't always fundamentally sound as a blocker, and that's what would get him in trouble. He'd stop his feet, or he'd hit a guy and just kind of, not really explode into a guy. But when his technique was right, I mean, you look at that 98-yard touchdown run, and everybody talks about the great block Anthony Knapp had, and he did. But if Cooper Flanagan doesn't drive that linebacker 5 yards off the ball, that guy maybe squeezes on Jeremiah after a 7 or 8 yard gain. But he blew that guy open, and Jeremiah. So he set the perimeter edge of that run play, and Anthony set the interior edge of the run play, and Jeremiah went right between the two of them for 98-yard gain, 98-yard touchdown. So, but Eli's going to have to get better. But Eli was without a doubt a better run blocker than Mitchell. He just needs to be more consistent, in my opinion. And Cooper needs to be just more consistently sound with his technique, because when he's consistently sound with his technique, he's a pretty good run blocker. But I am very curious to see what he does, what he's going to be able to do, because Cooper's is going to I don't know that he's going to be able to play in the spring. Because, I mean, at the championship game, my wife's got a picture of the team coming out into the locker room before after pregame, and then they go in the locker room, and he's still on the scooter with his leg up. And so it's like, will he be ready to go in the spring? I don't know. And if not, how ready is he going to be in the fall? So they're going to have to, in the spring, spend a lot of time working on the pass game, protecting the run game. And then once they get healthy at tight end, they can then incorporate some more of that stuff. But it's also a great opportunity for Eli Raridan to say, it's my time now. It's my time to take over at tight end and become that guy. Talent's there, man. He's just got to become that guy. And maybe he won't be the pass catcher Mitchell Evans was, volume-wise. Maybe he will. But I fully anticipate blocking at tight end, as you mentioned, Trevor, to be much better. And that's an important ingredient to an effective running attack when you don't have a Riley Leonard quarterback. And I want to make sure that I'm clear on something. We are not criticizing Riley Leonard. We're not saying how they did it in 24 was bad and how they're going to do it in 25 is good. It's just different. That's what we're saying. It's different.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm excited to see, because now the backs both have a year under their belt as full-time guys. Now they're also more ready to become that full-time guy. And I think we're going to see really some big-time playmaking from the running backs next season.
Well, that's one of the biggest reasons why we're excited for 2025 is you have an elite running back room. And obviously Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are going to take the bulk of the limelight. But Aeneas Williams came on in the postseason. I mean, early on, Aeneas and Devin Ford were kind of splitting reps as a third down back. And then Aeneas kind of emerged and became the guy. And then in the postseason against Penn State, you saw the impact that he could have on their opening touchdown drive of the third quarter. And so you go and you look at the rising stars that are coming up. I mean, in the small sample size that we saw of Kedron Young, not a whole lot of defenses wanted anything to do with 21 when he got the football in his hands, man. So you go and you look at this running back room and what you have coming back, and you compound that with the experience of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price just got to experience what it's like to play in a 16-game football season, which I think even further, because there's so many questions around, are they okay with splitting carries? I mean, they got banged up in a 16-game season. Imagine if they got the production that some people wanted them to see, right? And so I think the rhythm that they had this season was really good. But, Bryan, that's one of the reasons why you and I are so excited about the outlook of this 2025 offense is because of the running back room.
Mm-hmm. It is super talented. I mean, you talk about how your offense, what's the focal point of your offense? Like what is going to be, what are you going to major in, right? Like there's things when you look at an offense, there's things we major in, there's things that we're like, hey, this is the foundation of who we are. This is what we're built around. And then we'll have some complementary things to protect it. Right. And when you look at this offense going into next season, you're like, if they're not majoring in the running back being sort of the heart and soul of what they do, then I'm thinking maybe they're missing out on some things. You know what I mean? Like they're not where they need to be, because the talent in that room is so dynamic running the football. But one of the things that you and I have talked a lot about is I don't think they took full advantage of using the running backs in the pass game the way that I think Mike Denbrock wanted to. And the reason that I say that is not just in theory, projecting onto him what we think, we would like him to do, but just looking at early in the season what they tried to do. they'd have Jeremiah Love out there in the slot running routes and running slot fades. Remember, he did that against Purdue. He ran a slot fade against Purdue. We saw them try to get that going, but I just don't know that they felt comfortable with where they were in that regard to really get it rocking and rolling. And that's what led to them kind of tampering that down a little bit. I don't know that Riley was a great slip screen thrower. I think the quarterbacks they have now are going to be a little bit more better suited to that. Why was Riley not a slip screen thrower guy? Because Notre Dame wasn't a drop back throwing team. Slip screens don't work as well when you're a running football team that throws quick game and play action, because if you start dropping back, they're going to be like, hey, hold on a second. Why is this guy dropping back? And then they read that. So if you're more of an effective drop back team, then all of a sudden the slip screens work more effectively. The tunnel screens, I'm shocked that Notre Dame had the success they had with tunnel screens this year when you consider how condensed everything was to stopping the run. Imagine what it's going to look like if the pass game's more effective, the room they're going to have to hit some of those quick now screens and tunnel screens when teams have to keep both of their safeties back, when they have to keep, spread things out a little bit more. So those are all things that you look at and say, this is why I have expectations for this offense to be more effective getting the running backs the ball, because it's harder to get the running backs the football when everything is so close to the line of scrimmage, because there's somebody there to defend the running backs in the pass game more so than when you have a team that has to play you more straight up because you're more of a balanced offense. And that's why I think next year we're going to see them be more. And it's also, let's get Jeremiah and Jadarian some more touches and Aeneas some more touches without having them to have to get hit by 5 guys into the play. And that's what's nice about pass game touches. You get tackled by 1 guy usually, maybe 2. But we know that he wants to do that. I mean, we saw him with Aeneas. We saw him how he used Aeneas and stuff. I think there's also some things you can do on first and second down. It's just harder to do those things. Like, why does Mike Denbrock really think and Dylan McCullough really think that Aeneas Williams is that much better of a pass catcher than Jeremiah Love? We know that they don't, Trevor. But when Aeneas was in the game, teams played them more straight up because it was more passing situations, which then allowed Aeneas to get in some of those situations where he could get in space and catch the ball. If teams have to defend Notre Dame more straight up on first and second down, Trevor, that's going to open up some of those opportunities in the pass game to have more success hitting some of the swing routes, angle routes, check downs, slides, slip screens, wheel routes, things like that. So that's where I think we will see it look a lot different next season. And it's got the personnel to fit and in all aspects of it.
Common theme that we talked about throughout the season in 2024 was all of this can sound great, right? And we can talk about Notre Dame having a downfield passing game, and we can talk about the running backs getting more involved. But at the end of the day, everything starts up front, right? And the offensive line has been a hot topic of discussion so far this offseason. Sam Pendleton departed, Ty Chan departed, and then obviously Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler entered their name into the transfer portal as well. However, one of the biggest reasons why we're optimistic is Notre Dame's offensive line has a chance to be an elite unit this season with the talent that they have coming back that played in 2024 and kind of some of the young talent, very athletic talent that they have kind of waiting in the wings for their opportunity to get out on the field, right? So, Bryan, you go and you break down this offensive line unit. What about it just makes you so confident for the 2025 season?
I don't know that I would say confident is as much as optimistic or hopeful of what it can be. Optimism is more of, I know they're going to be really good. I'm more in, I think they can be really good,
Sure.
comma, but, ... Insert reasons why we need to see something. We need to see Joe Rudolph do a better job of teaching pass pro. They were not a very good pass pro team in 2023. They were not a very good pass pro team in 2024. You're at Notre Dame. At some point in time, you got to stop using the talent or the players as the problem for why pass pro is something you're not good at. It's one thing if Rocco Spindler gets beat on a twist because he's just not athletic enough to turn. It's another thing when he doesn't see it. And that happens with way too many players on the offensive line where they just don't see guys. That's a preparation problem. That's not you're not athletic enough or, you don't have experience or whatever the case may be. You got Pat Coogan, who's a senior who he's in his 26th career start, not having any clue that Cody Simon is coming on the most basic A-gap blitz you're ever going to see, and you just turn him loose. Like, that stuff can't happen ever, much less game 16 with a 26-game starter who's a senior. Like, that's coaching. That's got to get better. We saw these issues also in 2023. The fact that we're now into year 2 and we're still seeing issues with basic protection issues, that's got to get fixed. There's something missing in the preparation. That was true when Jared Parker was running the offense and true when Mike Denbrock is running the offense. Well, what's the one common denominator between those two things? It's Joe Rudolph. So Coach Rudolph is going to have to do a better job of figuring out how can we get this group playing better to handle the stuff that people are throwing at us. I know that Joe Rudolph knows how to pick up twists and stunts. It's not that. It's that whatever's happening in practice, they're not being prepared to see it and react to it in a way that you need to. There's a disconnect in the preparation. So what good coaches do, and I believe that Joe Rudolph's a good football coach, is they recognize that and they say, we got to figure out why this is happening and we got to fix it. Sometimes it's a tweak to your system. Hey, coach, if we're getting a lot of this, we need to maybe switch our protection to the opposite direction. Other times it's, hey, listen, in our preparation, we need to make sure we're doing this, this, and this during the week of practice to physically see that. We're spending a lot of time. We're showing them on film that this stuff is coming, but we're still not picking it up. That's because you haven't trained their bodies and their eyes to see it and react to it enough for whatever reason. So that's going to be a big thing. But if they fix that, the talent's there. Like, one thing I loved about this year's offensive line is my biggest criticism of Joe Rudolph in 2023 is his offensive line was not physical. They caught a lot. They didn't drive their feet at contact. I mean, how many times did you hear me complain in 2023, Trevor? They just hit and stop their feet. It's maddening. They hit and stop their feet.
Oh, yeah.
This year we saw that there was a couple times that, like, I thought Indiana that was an issue, and I thought against Georgia was an issue. They stepped up and did better against Penn State in the second half and against Ohio State of moving their feet when they had contact. But just overall, I thought the offensive line played more physical football in 2024 than they did in 2023. We saw them do a better job of working their feet through contact. That's great. Now keep building on that, Coach. That's a big thing. That encourages me. That is something I feel good about, especially, and here's the final piece, Trevor, and I'm curious if this is where you're at too. I still have questions about, will Joe Rudolph be able to put the right people in place, and because he's made major personnel decisions that have been problematic each of his 2 seasons as far as who he starts and where, and that's a problem. So that's a concern. But I look at the talent of this line and I'm like, it's much more mistake proof. If a coach makes a personnel mistake, he's making a mistake with a talented guy compared to another talented guy. So, like, I'm not going to be happy if Charles Jagasol's a right guard and and Anthony Knapp's at left tackle. But I'm still going to be like, but that's still a pretty talented group of guys. You hope that Jagasol's at left tackle and you make those kind of changes. But the point is, the talent is such that, I mean, you're talking about Jagasol, Schrouth, Craig, Wagner, Knapp, Absher, Chris Tarrick, Joe Otting, Gerby Lambert, who I should have probably mentioned earlier. You're talking about Peter Jones, Styles Prescott. You're bringing in Will Black, who's a 5-star, is 6'7". He'll be over 300 pounds by the time fall camp starts. Big-time player. You're going to have loads of talent next year. There is no Pat Coogan in the 2 deep next year. And I love Pat Coogan, but let's be honest. Athletically, Pat Coogan's a whole lot different than all those guys that we just mentioned outside of Christopher Tarrick. Christopher Tarrick's more similar to Pat Coogan athletically. Here's the difference. Chris Tarrick's about 30 pounds bigger than Pat Coogan and more powerful. So he's more Rocco. Christopher Tarrick's more Rocco, like even a bigger version of Rocco than he is about that. So the talent will be there, Trevor. That I'm not concerned about that at all. Now it's, can Joe Rudolph get the most out of that talent? That's my hesitation with this group. But the exciting part is it's going to be long, it's going to be more athletic, and it's going to be talented. Can they turn that talent into elite level play in all phases of the game, not just run game, but run game and pass game? If they can do that, this offense, that alone, Trevor, has me fired up about what this offensive line can be and what this offense can be. It's because if Joe Rudolph can get the most out of the talent he has, the most out of the talent next year is going to look a lot different than the most out of the talent he had this year when injury started. There is no Jagasol. There is no Ashton Craig. There wasn't Billy Schrouth for a month. Gerby Lambert was a true freshman who had no spring work. Like, is a different level this season. Now you're going into year 3 as an offensive line coach. Knapp's going into year 2. Jagasol's going into year 3. Gerby's going into year 2. Emil's going into – now the talent you're working with and the experience of that talent is significantly greater than what it was. And you're like, if you can coach up, if you can do what you're paid to do at a high level this year, man, this offensive line is going to be really awesome. And that's what gets me excited about it. And hopefully he makes the right personnel decisions. Because if Joe Rudolph makes the right personnel decisions this offseason and can fix some of the pass game schematic issues or teaching issues, I fully expect this to be a Joe Moore Award winning caliber line, where maybe they don't win it, but they should have won it. Like the 15-0 line. Didn't win it, but should have won it. You know, where you're like, boy, I don't know, maybe this line is better, maybe that line's better, but they're in the conversation for the best line in college football. If they just do that alone, then you're good to go. And that's what gets you excited.
Well, that's what makes me the most excited, right? Is because now the talent's there. Like when you go through and you talk about some of the mistakes before, Billy Schrouth should have been starting on the 23 offensive line, right? Billy Schrouth should have been starting at left guard in the 24 offensive line. Now, depending on where he decides to plug and play people in, to your point about being more mistake-proof, the issue won't be as glaring, I guess, if that makes sense. I have a lot of respect for Sam Pendleton and what he did, and I thought he had an extremely high ceiling. I would have loved to see him come back. With that being said, the way the offensive line group has built up this depth of talent and this amount of experience, you're not going to run into the issue next year of lining up a redshirt freshman next to a true freshman who have a combined 0 count of meaningful snaps of Notre Dame football, right? Now, I will say with the amount of talent that they have, that's going to be the difference whether they are a Joe Moore Award semifinalist or a Joe Moore Award winning offensive line, depending on the lineup that you roll out on August 31st, right? What we start to see over the course of fall camp, what we start to see in the spring. All right. I'm in the same boat as you. If Charles Jagasaw isn't your left tackle, I'm going to have a lot of question marks.
Unless it's Gerby, Emil, like one of those guys, because you want to get Charles on your power side.
Sure.
Mine is if it's Knapp specifically, because now Knapp can't be as good as he should be because you're not playing at him in his best position.
Right. You're not putting your players in the position to be the most successful that they can because their skill sets are stronger suited elsewhere. So I absolutely agree. So when
real quick, speaking of offensive linemen, we are aware of Tyler Merrill committing. That was what we were hinting at early in the show about potential news breaking. We're not going to tell you what's happening because it's not our news to break, but Tyler has now gone public with this commitment. And so I have a story published, and Trevor and I have already, that's what we said we would do at the end of the show. When we were hinting about some news breaking, it was Tyler Merrill committing. So we are aware of that. We will cover that at the end of the show. So that's where we're at.
Now, with this offense, there are still some potential question marks, right? But the thing that leaves us optimistic is because there's a lot of potential at these question mark positions, right? So which ones are the ones that we're talking about? Well, we spent a lot of time talking about the offensive line and their potential. We spent a lot of time talking about the running back room and how great they're going to be. So let's fill in the blanks here, guys. Quarterback, you have a question mark at. For the, fourth year in a row, there's going to be a new starting quarterback under center in South Bend. 4th or 5th?
6th.
Okay.
20. Ian Book, 21 Jack Cohn, 22 Tyler Buckner, 23 Sam Hartman, 24 Riley Leonard, 25 whoever. Sixth year in a row that Notre Dame will have a new quarterback.
So for the 6th year in a row, Notre Dame is in search for who's going to be their quarterback under center. And that's part of the reason why I love everything Riley Leonard did for this program. But some of it was, hey, it's time to move on to what the future is going to be, right? Whoever is going to be under center for Notre Dame. There's going to be question marks at wide receiver. You have Malachi Fields coming in, Will Pauling coming in, Jaden Greathouse had a really good final, call it combined, like 4 quarters of the postseason, right? You know, Jordan Faison, we got to see what he looked like when he was healthy. There's a lot of young talent that was waiting to develop and get healthy, waiting in the wings of this room. Then, of course, like we touched on earlier, tight end room has a lot of potential in it as well. But those are some of the question mark positions that Notre Dame has that we can't sit back and look and confidently say they have a handful. Like running back room has Jeremiah Love coming back, Jadarian Price coming back, and Aeneas Williams.
Right.
Exactly. O-line has Jagasaw, Shrouth, Craig. The list goes on. These are more of the positions that we have question marks on. So let me ask you this, Bryan. Out of those 3, between quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end, all question marks heading into this season, which one are you the most confident in that can reach that potential in 2025?
Wide receiver, because it's more proven. I mean, you've got Malachi Fields, who's caught over 1,600 yards and had over 100 catches the last 2 years in a Power 4 conference.
Right.
You know, you look at what Jaden Greathouse has proven. He led your team in receiving yards this year. He was your best. You know, he stepped up and had multiple 100-yard games in the postseason against 2 outstanding defenses. You know, Jordan Faison, for the only issue with Jordan Faison this year was health. And there's some technical things he's got to work through. You know, he's stacking. We talked about stack receivers better, things like that, or DBs better. But he was a true sophomore that also plays lacrosse. You know, there's just Will Pauling is a guy that's had over 1,000 yards receiving the last 2 years as well. They have 2 receivers on their roster that have caught over 1,000 yards worth of passes the last 2 years. And that's last year. I think they had. You had 2 of them last year as well. Well, actually, no, you didn't. Bo Collins had over 1,000 yards in his career, but he didn't have over 1,000 yards in the 2 previous seasons. But then you look at Jaden Greathouse. He's going to enter next season with 60 career catches, 857 career yards, and 9 career touchdowns. You know, you look at Jordan Faison, and you look at what he's going to walk into next season. He's going to walk into next year with 49 career catches, 678 career yards, and 5 career touchdowns. You know, and so like the proven production, and that's what's, you know, you and I were having this conversation before, and you'd made the comment like, you got to show it to me. And that's a totally fair thing. My only thing is the difference between this room and really the last 2 rooms is this room is more about just do what you've already done, where in 23, it was like, okay, I think Chris Tyree can be a good pass catcher. He's got over 1,000, you know, he's got over, 500 career receiving yards. He has a 100-yard receiver game out of the backfield. I think he'll be okay. You know, Tobias has got a lot of potential, only has 1 career catch, but he's got a lot of potential. You know, I think Jaden Greathouse can help you as a freshman. I think Rico can help you as a freshman. There's a lot of, I think Jaden Thomas can go from being a quality rotation guy to more of a focal point of your offense. I think those things can all be true. There was no proven production in that receiver room. I mean, your most proven guy was Jaden Greathouse or Jaden Thomas, who had like 20-some career catches. You thought you were bringing in a veteran in Caleb Smith, but he quit the team in the spring because he didn't want to play for Chancey Stuckey anymore. The kid that they brought in, not KK Smith, Caleb Smith, but Caleb Smith from Virginia Tech. And then he quits the team. And so it was always about potential in 2023. This year it was, I wonder if Chris Mitchell can make the same jump from FCS to G5 to P4. You know, can these young sophomores step up? What about the freshmen? You know, can Bo Collins maybe play beyond what he's done at Clemson? Well, he didn't. Well, if Will Pauling and Malachi Fields simply repeat what they did in past colleges, which is exactly what we saw from Bo Collins, they're far better players. So you have 2 guys that have over 1,000 career yards. You have another guy that's got almost 900 career yards and had his best moments in the postseason, and another guy with almost 700 career yards. There's so much more proven production now at receiver than what you have at quarterback, and even to a degree what you have on the offensive line. And that's why I say the receiving core. And then you get into the what ifs. Like, so the what ifs What if KK can stay healthy? What if Cam Williams can make a jump? What if Micah Gilbert can make a jump? Those are all the what ifs are now on the second level. Whereas in the past, those what ifs were on the first level. And that's the biggest difference for me between this year and the last really several years, because you could make the same case in 22 and you can make the same case in 21 with that receiving corps. There's a lot of what ifs. The last time you came into and even in 2020 it was that way. But you had, Javon McKinley stepped up, and then Ben Skoranek made a nice transition. It ended up working out. But in past years, you're like, gee, I hope Kevin Austin can really break out this year. I hope this is the year that Lorenzo Styles figures it out. And when Lorenzo didn't figure it out, you were screwed. Your receiving corps was toast. And that's kind of been the issue the last 2 years. This group is more, dude, just do what you've been doing. That's it. I don't need you. Now, if they play better, awesome. But if they just do what they've already done, you're in a great spot. And then if the ifs are now, if KK has that third-year jump can sail, if Cam Williams can tap into his big-time potential, if Micah Gilbert makes a big move this offseason, now you're really like, okay, now this receiving room is filthy now. And that's why that group is they got to all show they can do it at Notre Dame. That's the difference. But we've seen Malachi Fields walk into Notre Dame Stadium against an elite pass defense, a team trying to make it to a championship, and ball out. He didn't back down. He wasn't afraid of playing in that environment for a team that had inferior talent. I don't see him now being on the good side, and all of a sudden it's a problem playing in Notre Dame Stadium. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's where I'm like, it's different than with Chris Mitchell, who was playing in front of 12, 15,000 people, or Jaden Harrison, who was at Marshall, and saying, now you're going to transition to this place. No, Bo Collins was never the guy at Clemson. And he had to be the guy there. That's where I'm at, Trevor's. Malachi Fields was the guy for Virginia last year, and he played well. Now he's going to be the guy again, and he's going to have a much better supporting cast than what he had last year, including at running back and quarterback, not just receiver. And that's where I get excited about that group. Quarterback I love the talent, but it's very unproven. And I don't care what a guy did in a bowl game that nobody cared about and that you had a month to prepare for. That it's great, and I expect Steve to be poised, but that's not what matters to me. It's, can you do it week after week after week after week when you're the guy? Right. And I've said this a million times, Trevor, being a backup quarterback is a whole different level of pressure than being the starting quarterback. Guys coming off the bench in key moments when there's no pressure on you. The pressure comes when you're the dude. And we're going to find out if he can be that.
To all the points that you just made, that's why I'm also really, really excited about the receiving corps, because I did go on record. And I was like, I still need to see it. And to a degree, I still do. I need to see you do it in a Notre Dame uniform. But the reasons for optimism are significantly higher for me this season than they were going into 23 or they were going into 24. So for all those reasons, really, really excited about it. Bryan, before we transition over to some of the biggest questions that we have, any other reasons for optimism that you have? I mean, there's a lot, but anything that we didn't cover initially when we take a first look at this offense?
We don't talk enough. I'm very obviously you've got an outstanding offensive coordinator. You've got arguably the best running back coach in the business. The reason I'm optimistic is I saw some things on film in November and in the postseason that made me a lot more optimistic that Mike Brown is who I thought he was when they hired him. So more. I don't think we can just assume that the production we saw at receiver in the postseason and it being better is because the players figured it out, independent of the job that was being done with the coaching staff. So I do think that we started to see the Mike Brown effect start to take more hold later in the year. Now he gets a second full offseason. He's deprogrammed a lot of those bad habits. It's a more talented room. I think that's another reason for optimism is I started to see some things late in the year that make me think, okay, he is the guy that I thought he was coming in. And I had some doubts in the middle of the season. So that gets me a little fired up as well, as I feel the receiver room is in good hands when I didn't necessarily always feel that way throughout last season. but his unit stepped up when it mattered most. And that's partly on them, but that's also partly on preparation. And that's something that got me excited about this group.
Absolutely. And for me, the mark of a really good coach, not the only one, but the thing that I always pay attention to is year-long progression. Are you staying stagnant? Like, for 2023, you look at the wide receivers, like, were you the same against Navy as you were against Stanford the end of the year? Yeah, kind of, you know? But for this year, it was different, right? They were significantly better blockers as the season went on. Their urgency off the line got better as the season went on. So for all those reasons, I'm in the same boat as you are, Bryan. Well, look, guys, that's going to do it for the reasons for optimism for 2025. And this is going to be an ongoing conversation throughout the offseason, right? We're very far away from the blue gold game, from fall camp, from opening kickoff. So a lot of different things to cover here, a lot of different moving pieces. We're getting ready to move over to some of the biggest question marks that we do have, because for as optimistic as we are, there are still some hesitancies around this offense that we do want to address. Then afterwards, we're going to talk through potential breakout players, and the exciting news of Tyler Merrill committing to Notre Dame broke this afternoon just a little while ago. So we're going to wrap up today's show with that. But before we get there, folks, everybody hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. And as always, the best way to support what we do here, all the topics of conversation that we've had today have been ongoing discussions on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.